I've been doing a lot of thinking about failure. It's an interesting thing to think about, not because I've been obsessing about how to fail more or even why I failed before, but instead I've been doing a lot of thinking about how it is that we take failure, how we learn from it or how we fail to learn from it at the most critical junctures. I've been thinking a lot about transition in general. My life has been in transition. My family has been in transition. And one thing that I know is that I'm often called into situations where the people that I'm called to serve are themselves in transition. And sometimes as we transition from one season to a next, we lose ourselves in the process, in part because we don't understand that this whole thing is actually to help us find ourselves in the next level of our lives. What's going on, you guys? This is Maurice F. Martin, and this is another episode of Hope Rising. We are live today. Listen, I even went live on IG today, so if you guys are watching, shout me out. If you would want to engage in this conversation, you go for it. But today, we're talking about 3 huge mistakes that leaders make during transition. Well, first of all, let's talk about transition. Maurice, what do you even mean when you say it? Well, how many of you know that those types of words like transition, they vary based on the situation? There are some people who are in the midst of starting a thing, giving birth to a thing. They're transitioning from having nothing to having something. There are some people who are in the midst of going from what was to what will be. They are truly transforming their organization. They are growing it. It is being enhanced and it's being enlarged. And even in those beautiful and great moments of transition, there can sometimes be tragedy. There can be heartbreak. There can be frustration. We can take it out of the business world. We can even look at you in your home. And one thing that I know is that if you're not careful, as you begin to move through transition, you will lose yourself if you lose the fact that the whole point is to find yourself on the next level. All right, I'm just going to jump right in. Whoever gets to see it live sees it live. Whoever sees it afterwards sees it afterwards. But do me a favor, as you're listening, as you're watching, if something was for you, would you just comment that was for me? The number one big mistake that leaders often make during transition is not learning from failure. Maurice, is there really even failure when it comes to transitions in life and purpose? Well, yeah, there's mistakes, there's failure, there's times when we get it wrong, there's times when things don't work out. And so we have to understand, and I'm excited about this because my boy just jumped on, so I'm not going to be by myself today. This is going to be real good. This is going to be real good. Why don't we talk about how failure at times is a natural part of the growth and learning process? In other words, sometimes what you do is you sit down, you formulate a plan. You have a methodology that you take into things. You have a vision that you approach things with, and then it don't work out. You find yourself stuck and stifled and frustrated and lost. That's called failure. And what happens a lot of times is people either trudge forward without learning from the mistakes or the lessons that were available to them in the process, or they stop moving altogether because that feeling of failure feels like they weren't meant to be on the path at all. And so I think it is so critical for us to just acknowledge that failure is a part of learning lessons. I'm only the husband that I am to my wife because I trip sometimes. I get it wrong. I say the wrong thing at the wrong time. I do the wrong thing. I do the wrong things for the right reasons and the right things for the wrong reasons. It's a whole mess. And because of it, I learn. And so it's important for us to understand you can't be great at anything without getting some things wrong and then learning from them, growing from them, shifting and changing because of them. It's necessary. Man, I'm about to bring my boy out. You ready? You ready to come on? Man, I got Dylan Sellers with me, man. This my boy right here. This about to be a good conversation.
So I got a bone to pick with you. I ain't
Come
gonna lie
on.
to you.
Come
I got
on.
a bone to pick with you.
Come on.
So I said that we was gonna do this at like what 4?
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at my phone. I'm sitting up here 4 o'clock, and nothing. And I'm like, where's this dude at? Right. So listen, I just went and got up under my snuggie. It was like I'm gonna do my
That's what you
thing.
get. That's what you get.
And I'm scrolling on the Facebook, and I'm like, is this
I sent you a link. I
man
said,
live?
you know what? Hey, and I said it to
Mm-mm.
myself too. I said, well, if he comes on, he comes on.
Oh man,
I promised
what's
myself
going
I was
on?
going
What you talking
live
about?
today. We talking about lessons. We talking about 3 critical mistakes that leaders often make during transition. I picked 3. There's more than 3. I picked 3. I've been thinking about myself as a leader, some of my friends that I've been around as leaders, so many of the people I've been called to as leaders. And there are these common things that people fall into, traps, if you will, that people fall into in times of transition. So the first one I mentioned was not learning from failure. Not learning lessons from failure. What you think about that?
Fair, right? I think you have to understand where you failed
Mm,
before you can learn from it,
go on.
right? Um, in our day and age, we don't broadcast failures, and so therefore we don't acknowledge them,
Mm-hmm.
right? If it wasn't on the gram, it didn't happen. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Facts.
like
Actually, sometimes it's on the gram. It just gets deleted off of
it just gets deleted. You know what I'm saying? Like
it.
it was a thing that you know what I'm saying like we had talked about, but it wasn't the thing that I did. And so like because we're obsessed with only showing um the successes,
Mm-hmm.
because that is our obsession, we don't get the opportunity to actually learn from the failures. And sometimes there's a community learning that takes place, right?
Mm.
Because you've acknowledged that it was an L, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like watching sports, and like the sports analogies or the sports anchors and commentators on like Sunday morning or after a basketball game. I look forward to those, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because primarily they're analyzing failure,
Mm.
right? They're watching the tape back and they're saying, yo, he could have done this different. They could have done that different. Like, what was the coach doing? He was asleep at the wheel. And there's an acknowledgement that like this didn't go as well as we had hoped.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so once I could acknowledge that like this didn't go as well as I hoped, right? And I'm comfortable with myself knowing that just because I failed doesn't mean I'm a failure,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when I can acknowledge that, then like I can learn from it and move on. But prior to that,
We'll get to that one. That's
you know,
literally one of them. Well, let's talk about that even more, because one of my favorite things to do is watching the press conferences of some of my favorite players and my favorite coaches. Right.
Mm.
My favorite one is Coach Prime. Right. When you watch Coach Prime after they take an L, the way he takes accountability, the way he speaks to the honesty of the situation, the vulnerability he gives, while at the same time not wavering in his belief that
Mhm.
they're going to be all right, it's
Right.
something I take note of, right? That it's not about pointing out the mistakes, pointing out the failures, and then getting lost in them, right? It's not
Mm.
like just wallowing in self-pity, which, by the way, we all get there sometimes. I've been there in my life, right? That's not what we're talking about here, though. In this particular situation, we're talking about acknowledging it, owning it, and because you owned it, you take accountability for it and you move past it. I think it's real hard to move past something that you can't acknowledge.
No, because if it didn't happen, it didn't happen.
If it didn't happen, it didn't happen. That's it. I'm wondering. So I'm currently live on IG.
Oh, are you?
Do you think that you're probably on the broadcast with me, right? I think.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine so.
I would imagine so
But it
too.
wouldn't, it wouldn't show up the way that this is set up. It wouldn't show up on my page.
Just on
Does
my
that make
page.
just on
Okay.
your page? Just on
Okay.
your page.
That makes sense. That
Yep.
makes sense. Okay.
So I just shared it from Facebook.
Well, all right. You got anything to say about anything else about this one, or are we moving on to number 2?
Nah, let's ride. Let's ride. Let's ride.
Well, you started mentioning this was going to be the third one, but we just going to make it the second one since you just brought it up. The number two mistake leaders often make is taking the L's in transition as parts of their identity rather than parts of the process. Like you're going through the process, something doesn't go right, you start to right. Right. So some you thought you were ready for something, you find out you're not ready, but that's a normal thing, and you start to doubt the whole journey. Maybe I went the wrong way, maybe I wasn't supposed to go down this path, right? And you take it so personal that you miss how personal the growth was meant to be in that situation.
Yeah, you take the wrong fruit, right?
What's that
And
mean?
so like, you know, you could have a fruit tree, right, that didn't bear the fruit that you wanted to that season. And so instead of acknowledging that it didn't, and to say that like, oh, this fruit tree is no more, right? You took the leaf and was like, this leaf is disgusting, so chop down the tree. You know what I'm saying? Like there was leaves though, right? Like it sprouted something.
Come on.
Maybe it didn't sprout the fruit that you wanted to yet, but it sprouted something. What is that something? You took the wrong fruit. It was like, hey, yeah, this fruit, this is gross. So we're gonna scrap the whole tree, right? The problem is trees take a very long time to grow,
don't they?
and
Some of them
so
take years before you
and
can
so
even eat the fruit.
sometimes exactly, and so sometimes like you're digging up this tree when it just needed more time. It just needed more attention. And you saw it as a failure, right? Like you saw it as an L. Like, and for that season, if you were banking on getting fruit in that season, it was an L for sure, right? Like there is no money coming in from the fruit that you was trying to sell because no fruit showed up.
That part.
But that doesn't mean you need to cut down the tree, right? It doesn't mean that you're a failed farmer, right? To extend the metaphor a bit. But there is some truth to like it being difficult to separate what you do from who you are, right? It's difficult to do, right? And especially like if you happen to be a believer, right? Because you can't separate God from what God does.
Say that again.
Right? So as a believer, like I can't separate God's love from love. Right? So if God loves me, then God is love. And I know that God is God because of the love. So like I can't separate God from love. Right? And so then it's difficult for me to see myself as not a failure if I failed. Right? And so like I understand the struggle, right? And we make it sound simple, but it's not really, right? It takes some work. It takes some falling on your head and being able to get up, right? The proof that you're not a failure is that you didn't stay down.
Come on.
Right? That's the only proof that exists there. Like if you stay down, then maybe you got an argument, right? But you getting up is the proof that you're not actually a failure. You failed in that moment. And by God's grace, we gonna keep it pushing. Right. So
I'm also understanding that there's been some times in my life that when I got knocked down, God knocked me down for a reason, and there was some work I was supposed to do on the ground. You know, you were just talking about this farming analogy, right? And I'm realizing that sometimes it's like God knocked me on the ground, and when I was on the ground, I was looking around at these weeds, and I was looking around at this carnage on the ground, and I'm like, here I am again. Look at all this crap on the ground. Well, that's why you're on the ground. You gonna pull it up. You've had your pie in the sky. You were up in the clouds. You weren't paying attention to reality, and you missed some moments. Here you are back down here at the foundation. Will you catch it?
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes that those moments are actually meant to be grounding. I say this a lot when I'm in the addiction world. rock bottom is a firm foundation where you can rebuild your life,
Mm,
right? That low moment that you
heavy.
feel like is terrible, yeah, but now I can stand. So
Yeah.
sometimes when I'm on the ground, I got some work to do down there.
Yeah.
Then I can stand up and actually stay up.
No, that's super fair. I you know this, but I've been in this place around like um associating like pain with God or suffering with God.
Mm-hmm.
Um and how like I have noticed in my experience of the faith there is an emphasis on suffering, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
and that's a part of the faith, you can't get around it, but there's an emphasis on suffering and pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
um like a lot of our songs are about overcoming.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't necessarily about joy. You're kind of hard pressed to find a gospel song
Mm-hmm.
um that's uplifting, right? They aren't all uplifting, right? And so even sermons, right? Like a lot of sermons aren't necessarily like, they're talking about like the reality is like, I'm a filthy rag, right? Like, and that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But like for a person who understands oppression to associate God with only oppressive behaviors
Mm.
becomes problematic for my growth,
There it
right?
is.
Even as a leader,
Mm.
right? And so the reason I even brought this up is because you said like sometimes God knocks you down so you can see the weeds. And I think um I would have phrased in this part of my life, I phrased that differently. I think that the point remains true,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that like God points, and because God points, it forces you to look,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And so like it isn't necessarily God as this like big figure who pushed you to the ground,
Mm-hmm.
right? You fell,
Mm.
right? Like you were probably engaged in something that
Mm.
caused you to trip over something, right? And since you're down here, God's pointing.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I like that.
Very.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hard pressed to say that God like knocked me down,
Mm.
right? Um, but I can say based on like me, I don't know about everybody else. I can't say that I've put myself in some situations
Mm-hmm.
where I ended up on the ground from choices that I made, and God was like, "Well, since we're here, there's some
Mm.
things
Mm. Oh
that
well, I've sometimes we end up in low situations that had nothing to do with our decisions, too.
that's fair."
Life's as well.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, but I'm with you in that I think those moments are opportunity points.
mm,
And I think that the reason sometimes we miss them is because of our interpretation of the moment,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
So if you're on the ground, let's use your analogy, you're on the ground and God points and he says, "Look at this." And you go, "I know. I feel enough shame that I'm not pointing at this for you to feel shame."
right,
that's
right,
that's I'm not a God of guilt and shame. That's not the point of this. I'm the
yeah,
God of redemption and grace.
mm,
I'm pointing at some things
hallelujah,
for you so that we can clean some things up so this can
yeah,
finally stop haunting you, right?
yeah,
I think that that's sometimes where we go wrong in these moments is that people want so badly to get to the next part of the journey that they miss, and this is really my number 3, right? That one of the things that I see in my own life and in the lives of so many others is that we want so bad to get to the destination that we miss all of the transformation that's meant to happen in the midst of the journey.
mm-hmm,
Like where you are right now is a beautiful place.
yeah,
Right now.
yeah,
Everything that you need for your life is here right now. Everything you need to grow, everything you need to learn, to laugh, to love, to embrace, it's all here. And if you're waiting to get to the destination, you're going to get there and be sadly mistaken because you missed all those moments.
yeah. I often say that to people who come to me when they're struggling about where they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I lead in a lot of different arenas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you
Um,
do.
and so there's people who come to me and talk to me about, where they are and their frustrations in that space. Um, and the overwhelming thing is I tell them like, I'm really happy for you,
Mm,
right? Where you are is where exactly you need to be,
mhm,
right? Because what you're going to be able to learn while you're here, I think you should be paying attention to like the world around you, right? Like
mm,
what's going on, right? Like what does it feel like? What does it smell like, right? Because you don't want to miss these moments. Um, the Bible says that these are momentary light afflictions,
mhm,
right? Um, which is wild to say to somebody who just lost it all,
mm,
right? That it's momentary and light. Um, it's a wild thing to say to somebody who just like lost a sibling and like your the life has crumbled around them,
mhm,
right? And to say that like God is still able, and you aren't going to die in it. Like your career isn't over because of the grief that you feel, right? Like it's there's a lot that is viable
mm,
about this situation.
mhm,
The pain is real, and I know it don't feel momentary. Been there, don't feel momentary, but it is in fact momentary.
mm.
Um,
So
uh,
how does a person get that perspective? Like, if there's somebody they're watching, they're listening, and they've been going through their journey, they've been trying to get that perspective. They've been trying to believe it's temporary. It's just a moment in time. Hey, I'm going to learn from this. Hey, all things work together for the good. They've had every Bible verse thrown at them,
yeah.
but for whatever reason, they just can't get over this feeling of being stuck and being lost and being in a dark place. I mean, what do they do?
Um, I would first advise them to like lean into community, right? And talk. Literally, just get it out, talk it out. Like call somebody and tell them that like you know I believe in God, but like this is stupid.
Mm,
The whole thing is dumb. I'm very angry with the Lord on this one. Uh, I believe if he's up there, he's not doing a great job. That is that is a fair statement to make. Do you know what I mean? Like from your perspective, fair statement to make,
mhm,
right? The question is not like do you believe that and carry on with that, but you want to be able to get it out so that you can breathe
mm,
because like what you're experiencing is grief and grief is heavy, right? And so like if you don't have an outlet for it, and grief is not just if somebody dies, right? It's
at
any
all.
it's any major change in your life,
That part.
right? That you're grieving. So
Hmm.
what you're experiencing is grief,
Hey
and
man,
it's
it don't
heavy.
even have to be major. You ever
It
had a hat
don't.
that you like to wear? You wear this hat
Oh
all the
my
time,
god,
and you
grief.
realize you can't wear this hat no more. The jeans ripped and it ripped in place. You can't wear these jeans no more. That's not
I
even.
actually had that happen. I actually had that happen. No joke. I was in where was I? Alabama. I was in Alabama for work, and these jeans that like I absolutely loved, and I had been looking for them. That's the key. I've been looking for this particular color jean forever. Couldn't find it in my size, right? Big guy, couldn't find it in my size. Found the jeans, and I ain't gonna lie to you, I wore them suckers all the time.
Yeah,
Like
yes, we already knew that. Let's to be
wore
very
them
clear,
suckers
because you wore them things out, so we already knew.
all the time. Hear me? And they, bro, like I was so sick when they tore. They tore in the seat, but it wasn't on the seam. Cause like my wife could have probably like sewed it if it was like if the seam had ripped. The seam didn't rip. It was like at the seat. And I called my wife and everything. Like I was I was grieved. When it
Mm.
came to time to pack up to go home, I was like, listen, y'all gotta stay here. I can't take you back in my in my I don't even want a reminder that these things are
Am
done.
I the only person who's wondering if he really actually was talking to the pants? Listen, y'all, you gonna have to stay here. You can't come with me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Listen, I had a whole conversation with these G's, bro. I did. But that's to that point, right? Like grief is that real,
Mhm.
right? And there's varying degrees of it. So the first thing I tell you is just talk,
Mm.
right? Like get it out, share it with somebody, because like you need to get the weight off of you so you can breathe, right? And that's the second thing I tell you. You need to breathe, because like once you're aware that breath is still happening, it's an indicator that life is still happening. Right? Because when you grieve, when you're really in the middle of some like heavy grief, it does not register to you that like life is still happening.
Sure doesn't.
It just doesn't, right? Like, and so like once you're talking about it, once you've cried about it, once you've gotten it out and you start breathing, right? Then we can talk about like what's moving forward. Right? Like, and those two things sound simple, but they take the most time
because they take intentionality.
Oh man, yeah.
Right. And just if you guys are tuning in right now, you're dropping in right now. We are actually live right now. This is Hope Rising Live, and I don't know, we probably about to start doing this more often. Just jumping on and just having some conversations and just getting ourselves in front of cameras more often. I don't know if it'll always be called Hope Rising, but it'll be something with us in front of this camera, right? and so what you were just talking about made me think about. So I'm doing this training this week, and it's like an intensive training. And the coach who's in charge of it all, he said, listen, after the second day, he said, here is your assignment for anybody who's brave enough to take it. He said, I want you to do ice water challenge, right? Now, he said, there's different ways you can do the ice water challenge. He said, you can get, a bucket full of ice. You can put your hand in it for 5 minutes. You can put a foot in it for 3 to 5 minutes, or you can go get in a bathtub. You can go as low as you can go, or go all the way to your neck, or however you want to do it. And he's like, but ideally go 5 to 8 minutes, but if not 3 to 5, right? And he said, now here's the key. The best way to do it is you must control your breath before you get into the cold. He said, and it's important for you to understand that when the water hits, your brain is going to start telling you danger, and pain is going to fly through your body. But the pain is not being triggered by the actual body part. It's being triggered by your mind. And the longer you stay in the water, the brain will stop firing off those signals. And so, this morning I was like, well, I had to do, hold on. This is how it really happened. Can I tell the truth? This is what really happened, right? So I was like, well, clearly I'm just putting my leg in it, because I'm not getting in this cold water. But Ash was listening to the training too.
Yep.
So when I walked out, she was like, so babe, I'll go and I'll get some bags of ice. And I was like, well, I don't know that I necessarily have to be one of the ones to go all in. She's like, but you've been talking about it lately. You were already saying you wanted to try it. I said, So she didn't buy the bags, but now that like she had set the bar, right?
Right.
Like wifey had set the standard. So I had to meet the standard, period. The standard is the standard, right? So I get some bags of ice this morning, and just what he said. I got in the water, and I started this thing called box breathing. It's intentional breathing, paying attention when the breath comes in, holding that breath for a little bit, being intentional when you let the breath out. And the more I stayed calm, the less it hurt, and the more I relaxed. And after a while, the water didn't actually feel cold. And what was the lesson that I learned? How many times in my life am I in the midst of transition and my brain starts saying danger, danger, and if I would just breathe. And that was the entire point of why he gave us the exercise, right?
Yeah.
To learn to value the breath in those moments.
Can I take the other side of that?
Go for it.
What happens when you get bored in the water? Right? So you've controlled your breathing. You're in this thing, but now you're bored. Because anything that you master doing can bore you. Right? So I want to talk to because that's a leader at one point in the game, right? Where I'm just trying to control my breathing.
Right.
right? But there's another level where like controlling my breathing has never been my issue,
Mm.
right? I'm bored.
Mm.
I'm very good at this. Ice baths are part of my routine,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So much so that my body don't even trigger it as danger when I hit the water.
Right. That's a whole. That's a whole person.
It's just not
The
a
person who was given the exercise.
yeah, it's just not a thing. It's not a thing anymore. However, I am bored, right? It don't excite me no more.
Mm.
It don't do what it used to do for me,
Mm-hmm.
right? It don't push me anymore. What do you do as a leader when transition is less about like that your transition is less about like you getting in the door. The transition is like, so what's the next level?
You find out. I think that is the next level. The next level is asking yourself, then why are you in the same routine?
Mm-hmm.
If getting in the same water the same way all the time is boring, what have you done to shift your life? That's why I'm live right now.
Mm.
That's why I'm live. It's a little more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I've been going to certain facilities over and over and over and over and over and talking about the same things over and over and over and over and over. I just want to go on and just start talking. I was excited when you jumped on. I did it like that on purpose. I said, it's been 10 minutes. He'll see this at some point. I'm just going on. And
Just go.
I'll just navigate. I'll navigate the shift. Whenever I don't know where I'll be in the. I based the title of today's conversation on the training. So the training this week, he said, pick a title and make it something about mistakes or failures or things. And there's a whole methodology behind it. I'm not going to talk about life. And so I said, I'm going to just try something. I wrote down 3 points for myself. I said, we'll see how it goes. And I just hit play. Why?
Yeah.
Because I want to get out of my comfort zone so that I can learn how to breathe in different water.
Mm.
I've been trying different types of intros and different. I filmed a training video yesterday. I watched a woman teach me a training class. Then I got in front of my own camera. I did an hour-long workshop that's going to be dropping next week, and I started it the way she told me to start it. She said, "Use these words." Okay. I started it with her words.
You're a machine.
And I'm a machine that's fine-tuning. And
Yeah.
that's what you just described.
Yeah.
If you are bored, it's because you've stopped fine-tuning.
Talk.
You see what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
there's broad changes and there's broad transformations, and then there's those micro transformations. And it's really in some of the small tweaks that we're forced to mature and grow. I realized that there are some things that I've just been able to get by on with my natural talent. And that's great. But my natural talent's only taking me so far, bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hence why I'm doing more than one training in a week. I've literally been just like, I barely slept this week, is what it is. Why? Because I was bored. And because I don't have a bank account for boredom.
No. That's a stone cold fact.
I got babies, I got a wife. I need something different in my life.
Yeah. I think that it's necessary to say that like I don't necessarily advocate for like I called you machine as like a compliment, but you're not a machine, you're a human. And like rest is important. Dare I say boredom is even important, right? Because it is when you get to that place that you realize that there may be something else that you need to be doing. Right. I get revelation when I'm bored. Right. I very rarely get revelation when I'm fully engaged in a thing, right? Because I've given my whole self to it, my whole mind to it. And so like it is when I'm allowing the word of God to like rumble around in my head, or when I'm letting a conversation roll around in my head, like, and I've allowed the information to like sit around and marinate a bit, that I'm actually getting information, and that in and of itself is me being bored, right? Like,
yeah, I think it's interesting because you and I also are very different with how we lock in and how we get to innovation.
That's fair.
I get to innovation in a very different place.
Mm-hmm.
Like well, you know this, everybody listening don't know this. I've done a whole lot of sitting and a whole lot of chilling, and my brain, that's when it starts to work against me, right? When I get active, it's like something happens and all of my creativity starts coming. Revelation, I start seeing the scriptures, and stuff jumps into my spirit, and words, and you and I had a conversation the other day. We were talking about music and how my music career and musical concepts fit into the coaching and the speaking and the things I do,
Mhm.
right? From that conversation, I'm like, shh, 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 right? Because we had the conversation when I'm fully locked and loaded, right? I'm engaged. It's the
Mhm.
most active listening that I do when I'm sitting in those types of deep conversations. And so I think that I'm learning that in this season of my life, I must get back to a place of stretching
Mhm.
that is uncomfortable but necessary. And I partially know it because I didn't start it on my own. It's like one day I woke up and it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, "Why is it 2 o'clock in the morning?" And I tried to go back to sleep and I couldn't go back to sleep, so I
Mhm.
just like laid. You know what I mean? Started watching YouTube videos. Then the next day I was up at like 2:30. I was like, "What is going on that I can't sleep?"
Started noticing a pattern.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I started saying, "Well, if 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 the Lord was trying to give me an extra 3 to 4 hours a day,
Mhm.
what would be
Mhm.
the most ideal way for me to spend this time? How should I start this day with 3 extra hours, right?" And so
Mm.
and so then that gets you to asking that real question of, well, then what is important to you, right? What are your priorities now? I know what they were before, but if you have been gifted any sort of resource in abundance, I don't care if it's money or if it's awake time, right? If you've been given the resource in abundance, what are your priorities, and how should you be utilizing them and acting with them? And it became clear to me that there was some things that are just really important to me, and I'm being afforded an opportunity to interact with them, and I'm seeing how they're growing me in a very short period of time. And some
Yeah.
of it has to do with prayer, and some of it has to do with scripture, and some of it has to do with building the things that I say I want to build.
That's a that's a blessing, brother. I try to be mindful. I've tried to be mindful recently of rest. Um, and like there are times for that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
and like you said, we've engaged it a bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this me, I'm a last year was crazy for me. Like
Mm-hmm.
I traveled more than I've ever traveled for work. And that kept me away from things and people. And there was a prep period between going to these places, right? And so like I'm traveling 2 or 3 times a month, right, to different places, and realizing that like when I'm on that grind, I'm not thinking much,
Mm-hmm.
right? All of my thinking pretty much has been done. I'm reacting to the things that are in front of me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if I haven't put the right stuff in, I don't have the right stuff to pull from.
There you go.
Does that make sense?
100%.
Yeah.
I think that's a real place, and I don't think that should be disregarded. And and for somebody who doesn't know my story, people probably don't know. I mean, I literally spent most of last year with a part-time job, um, and spent a part of my year where I was laid off and was just working on the formative parts of my business and spending time with family. And so, um, I'm in a go season. You know what I mean? Like I'm in a go moment.
Hmm.
And I'm finding that the rest is actually coming not in time alone or time of that kind of intentionality. My rest is coming with partnership.
Mm.
I'm going to have to get off of here in just a moment, but I will say that one of the things that I'm resting in is resting in collaboration. Some of the moments where I've got to work on the business, but I go sit down next to my wife and go, here's where I'm at, and like listen to her talk and
Oh,
say,
that's
is this to
good.
me? There's
That's
rest
good.
in it. There's
That's
rest in
good.
that, right?
Yeah,
There's
for sure.
calibration in it. Even when I'm hitting you up and we're having conversations and we're bouncing things back and forth, there is something restful about that for me,
Mm,
because it's something that when I'm by myself, there's a level where I feel unable to rest because I have questions that are unanswered and I don't feel like I have an outlet to let them out so that I can chill. And so those moments help me feel like, now I can breathe,
yeah.
right? And that's really an answered prayer. I'm such an isolating individual, and I've been praying, Lord, would you let me recalibrate to people? So to me, that is, I'm not doing all things on my own,
Mm.
and nor do I want to. And so, listen, final thoughts, because I actually have to run out of here. Final thoughts, final feelings, final whatever.
I think the your thoughts around the three mistakes that leaders make during transition are key,
Mm,
right? Because we are in a transitional mode.
mm,
Most people are, right? We are. They're starting a new year. I saw a lot of new jobs, new positions on LinkedIn. Right, people are making moves and moving into a different space. Right,
mm,
and so like if you can catch that, you're not learning from your mistakes. Right, if you
mm,
can catch that you're identifying with your mistakes. Right,
mm,
like those being keys, if you can catch those, it brings you into a space where you don't have to stumble,
mm.
right?
That's good.
That you can walk into transition instead of falling into transition.
There it is. There it is. I love it. I love it. Well, listen, if you guys have enjoyed this, make sure you share it. If you're watching, make sure you go to YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are live, by the way. I don't know if you guys knew we were live or not. I see some people are watching right now. But go ahead, leave a comment. Did you have any takeaways from this conversation? I'm sure we'll be. Oh, you know what? Ash and I are going to be on tomorrow. We'll be live tomorrow at some point in the afternoon. So keep a lookout on that for me and Wifey. I'm looking forward to that. But for now, we will see you soon. Oh, also, if you have not seen this week's episode of Hope Rising, you will see my man Dylan and two of our best friends all having a conversation together. So please go make sure you check that out, this week's recorded episode of Hope Rising. And for now, we'll talk to you soon.